My name is Bruce Robertson. I guess I should have put that on the slides. Didn't think about it. My company is called RTI Media. We've been around actually for 35 years doing various things. I come from the radio business, which I will show you in a minute. And I thought today when Bill said, would you like to do a session? And I said, yes, I'd like to talk about the weather. And we're also going to talk about EAS, Emergency Alert System. You may not in your station be doing the weather or be doing something for the weather, but everybody's got an EAS device that you've got to use. You don't have the option of not using it. And we'll talk about that in the situations where you have to use it and the situations where you don't have to, and so on. As I was plugging all this stuff in, I started thinking about another conference that I went to. I go to a lot of radio conferences, and I met a guy from a small community station somewhere in Arkansas, and I said to him, what do you do for the weather? And he said, well, we just tell our listeners to look out the window. And I said, I have no answer for that. I guess I should try and think of one, but I have no answer for that. So hopefully you're not in that situation. We'll see if the technology works here. All right, weather options for radio stations. I used to write a script when I did a presentation, and I discovered I was not looking at it at all, and I would lose my place and get all messed up. So now I'm just going to look at my own slides, and this will help keep me on track and be less confusing, hopefully. So we're going to talk about, I had a college class once with a professor that I thought was really good, and he said, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to tell you, then I'm going to tell you, and then I will summarize what I told you. And I said, all right, I like that. And he also used to say, it was a law class, and he said, no easy answers, just hard questions. And that's probably the only thing I remember from the whole class. So my history, we'll talk about why do weather for a radio station, the options that you have from a company like mine or others. There are lots of weather companies, and honestly, they may be a better fit for your radio station than mine, and that's fine. Then we'll talk about EAS a little bit and other severe weather options that you have at your disposal, and something that we're actually working on that hopefully will be released sometime in my lifetime. We've created a severe weather application that I'll talk about, but it has not been released to the world because I'm a worrier, and I have a lot of my grandmother in me, and I keep worrying, well, we're going to get something out in the world and it won't work to my satisfaction, and then what do I do, because it's already out there. So I've been holding it up for 3 or 4 months now as I try to find things wrong. And I have a group of programmers that work for me, and I say, well, what about this, what about that, what about this, and they get a little irritated with me after a while. So let's talk about, real quick, my history. No, my history disappeared. All right, let's try that. There we go. I worked for a secular station back in the day in Youngstown, Ohio. I was the news director, had a group of reporters working for me. We won lots of awards. We did actual local news, which has disappeared pretty much from the radio these days. We had 6 people on my staff, and then we had 5 people, and then we had 4 people, and I ended up all by myself. And I could see where that was going. And I had already started my own company. So at some point I gave them 4 months' notice, and I drove around the country for 6 months trying to decide where I wanted to live and do my own thing. I didn't like the feeling of somebody else deciding whether I was going to be employed or not. That station is now owned by Cumulus, which owns 400 or 500 stations. I believe they've been bankrupt 3 times. So it's probably a good move to leave. My first business was telephone on-hold messaging. If you ever call anywhere and they put you on hold and you hear a recording, we may have made that. We've done that for over 30 years now, and we've done way over 250,000 recordings for people's businesses' telephone systems in every state but Hawaii. And when I came upon that business long ago, I said, well, that's radio on the phone. We can do that. I like the sound of that. So we also, at one point, manufactured our own devices to play something on the telephone. So we've done a little bit of manufacturing. And then I morphed into, remember telephone time and temperature? A phone number you could call to get the time, the temp, and the weather forecast? Those are still around. And I said, well, I want to be in that business. The worst thing about having your own business is that you can do whatever you want, even if it's not a smart thing to do. And I've done that many times. And my wife will say, what are you thinking about? And I'll say, I had another idea. And she says, oh no, not that again. But I wanted time and temperature. This is 25 years ago. And I found programmers, I am not a programmer, to create what I wanted. And we launched into the time and temperature business. When I grew up in Buffalo, New York, we had 3 of those, and I used to call them all the time when I was a kid. And so when I got older and I had the opportunity, I said, I want to do this myself. So at one point, we made our own devices. We manufactured them. And what I discovered was what you don't want to do for a living is provide internet-connected devices to people. If they have a network problem, it's my fault. If they have a broadband problem, it's my fault. If they have a power problem, it's my fault. And we had weather instruments on the roof of whatever building, and they broke all the time. And it would take the whole system down, and I said, this is not any fun at all, much too stressful. So we did away with that, and we made the whole thing virtual, and we now have, and we're still doing this, by the way. We have 4 servers now, 1 for each time zone, and they take, and between us and a partner of ours, we take way over 1.5 million calls a month on telephone time and temperature, which usually amazes people because they say, well, I can get that on this. What do I need that for? And I say, well, we're getting 1.5 million calls a month. When no one calls it, we'll turn it off. Until then, this is what we're going to do. So we've been doing that for quite a long time now. And my voice is on about 3,000 of these around the United States. And probably 15 years ago, one of our telephone time and temperature customers is a guy who has 2 small Christian stations in eastern Tennessee. And he said to me, and he was our telephone time and temp customer. And he said, why can't you give me an audio file of the stuff you have on the phone so I can put it on my radio station? And I said, well, the short answer is, that's not so easy. We have lots of technical things we have to solve. So over a number of years, I would say to the programmers, all right, let's do this part, let's do this part, and we slowly stitched the whole thing together, and we created some radio weather services. Because after all, I am a radio guy, that's where I came from. And as I don't need to tell you guys, once you're in radio, you can't get out. You're pretty much stuck. You might think you've escaped, but you have not. Radio always is with you. So one of the things we created is called Sunshine Weather for Christian radio stations. And we'll talk about that a little bit. But really the overall question is, why provide weather at all? And you're familiar with some of the recent disasters that we've had. And in some cases, there was very little warning for some of those. In other cases, the traditional methods of warning people didn't work. And there was loss of life and tremendous devastation. You're familiar with all of those things. I live in North Carolina now, and in the western part of the state, I live in the central part. The Asheville area was just devastated, just unbelievable what happened there. And it's going to take years and years to recover from that. So I'm not saying do weather because there might be a disaster. There are also other reasons. For example, I was listening to Robert's presentation yesterday. In fact, I took a picture of one of his slides on the screen, and he said something that I've said a million times: you cannot out-Spotify Spotify. Can't be done. What can't they do? Be a local radio station. They will never do that. They don't have the ability. It's never going to happen. So his slide said, local connection is your advantage. What's more local than the weather? So that's another reason to do it. And during those disasters that I talked about, not all, but many radio stations stayed on the air, especially if they had a generator. And radio is still a reliable source of daily and emergency information. And we'll talk about the alerts that come to your cell phones in a little bit. But just a teaser for that, I guess. All the cell phone towers went down during those disasters. Nothing was sent to people's cell phones. And a few radio stations, like I said, had generators. They stayed on the air, providing literally life-saving information. Radio is a big deal. And it concerns me that radio in general has lost a couple of generations. As you heard yesterday during some of the presentations, the average age is 64. And if you talk to, especially for AM, if you talk to a 20-year-old, many are not even aware there is an AM, much less anything else. And we're all fighting about, is it going to be in the dashboard and so on and so forth. I'm an optimist about this stuff. I think radio has legs. I think it's going to continue on. I'm a huge fan of Christian radio because you are the only communicators left in the radio business, as far as I'm concerned. I do a lot of road trips to visit stations and show them what we do and whatnot, and I'm always hitting the seek button. Now, I don't want to listen to that. I don't want to listen to that. I don't want to listen to that. And it upsets me because they're, especially the secular stations, are jukeboxes. And again, you cannot out-Spotify Spotify, especially when you've got 12 minutes an hour of commercials. What can they do? They can be local. That's what it's all about. And it's very frustrating to see them continually going in the wrong direction. My opinion only. But in addition to the things that I mentioned, another aspect of providing weather to listeners is that it can be a source of revenue. And I don't know of any stations of any format that don't need more revenue. You might be non-commercial, but that does not mean you don't have bills to pay. And you've got to bring money in somehow. We have a secular station that's using our weather in Hastings, Michigan, population 7,500. He's making between $3,000 and $4,000 a month running our weather with sponsorships. And there's no reason that Christian stations can't do that with underwriters or sponsors as well. That alone is a reason to do it. I know everybody, we've got a mission, right? The mission is primary, but you have to fund the mission. And this is one way that you can do that. And what we do, by the way, is entirely automated. There are no humans involved. Just very quickly, I don't want to focus on this, but this predated AI, what we've been working on for all these years. We recorded, in my voice actually, 15,000 audio phrases. Every possible temperature, every wind speed, every phrase that appears in a weather forecast. Just a miserable job. We recorded them all, and they're all sitting in the cloud now. And the way our weather works is when, in an automated way, we give you software for this, you request a weather file for your automation to put on the air, it creates it at that moment and grabs some of those 15,000 files, merges them together, mixes music in the background, and sends a completed file to your automation. That whole process takes about 4 seconds. and it's close to being real-time weather. So what are your options? And like I said, there are lots of weather options. We are by no means the only folks who do this, as I'm sure you know. A lot of folks have their on-air staff record a forecast and play it back later. I know of a station in Pennsylvania that they have the staff record the weather on Friday afternoon to play back on Sunday, which is a little problematic. Old weather is bad weather, probably, but that's what they do. A lot of stations, we use the local TV weather guy. And basically what that means is the TV weather guy, and there are some weather companies that do this as well, they will record a weather forecast for you, and the radio station will play it for 3, 4, 5 hours until that person records another one and sends it to them. So they play the same weather hour after hour. Again, old weather is not good weather. And they have to leave things out that definitely will be wrong 4 hours from now, like the temperature and weather alerts, severe thunderstorm warning, things of that nature. We'll talk about that in a minute. So the commercial options from a company like me or somebody of that nature, if you are looking at doing weather for your station, and a lot of Christian stations have said to me, we've always wanted to do this, we didn't know where to get it. I said, well, here we are. Or like I said, occasionally we're not a good fit for somebody, and I can suggest somebody else that might be a better fit for them. But is it updated every single hour? That's what I would want to know. Because it's updated every hour, now they can include the current conditions, the temperature, the wind speed, the wind direction, the humidity, the heat index, the wind chill, the rain conditions, the sky conditions, that kind of thing. And more importantly, the alerts. There's a severe thunderstorm warning in effect until 7 o'clock. Somebody who records a file that's intended to play for hours, they have to leave all that out because the thunderstorm warning will not be in effect 4 hours from now. And the temperature will certainly be different 4 hours from now. So that's the kind of thing to look for. And of course, the cost. Because you're non-commercial, some weather companies will only deal with commercial stations because they can barter for the weather service. In other words, they give you free of charge, quote unquote, the weather service, but then they say to that commercial station, you're going to run the commercials we give you for 4 minutes per day or something like that. And they get paid by the advertiser who provided that commercial to them. For a non-commercial station, you don't have that option because obviously you can't run traditional commercials. So that's basically what we do. If you're interested, stop by the table. I can play you some audio and whatnot. I have some other kinds of audio to play for you, but it's not about that. So let's talk about emergency weather. This is something that you already do because, as you know, you have to have an EAS device in your radio station. That is not optional. Although I have heard there are a few stations here and there that don't have them. I don't know how that's possible. I guess they're counting that the FCC will never come to visit. And they do come to visit occasionally. They operate a lot, and I assume the attorneys who were here earlier would agree, if they get a complaint about something, they'll check it out. And while they're in the neighborhood, they may visit the other stations around there. So you might get a visit even though you had no infractions or there was nothing wrong and no complaints. So going back to the history of emergency alerting, we started with CONELRAD, 1951. This was during the Cold War. And we were all doing the duck and cover and all that stuff. I don't think I can play audio from this while I've got the full screen for the, let Let me see if I can play this and see if it works. See if you remember this. No, it doesn't work, Derek. All right, let's try it again.
This is a test. This station is conducting a test of the emergency broadcasting system. This is only a test.
I won't play that whole thing.
This is a test.
It's annoying. But you remember that. That is what replaced Conelrad at the time. Go back here and start from the current slide. That was the emergency broadcast system. In fact, the station, the last station that I worked for, they told me they continued to use my voice for 15 years after I left, saying, "This is a test. This is only a test." Needless to say, I was not compensated for that. EBS was replaced by EAS, Emergency Alert System. That's what you have now. And this is all too much stuff. We can thank ChatGPT, my good friend, for creating these slides, but they put too much stuff on one slide. So I'll tell you what they say if it's too hard to read. There are all kinds of alerts. Some you have to run, some you do not have to run. There are a lot of optional things in there. So, for example, up at the top there, you see national alerts, also called presidential alerts. Weather alerts, there are 137 possible weather alerts, which I learned because we created a severe weather application that I'll talk about in a minute. Everything from, so when I talk to a radio station, I say, "Do you want air stagnation advisories on the air?" And 100% say no. And I say, "Do you want anything on the air with the word tornado in it?" And 100% say yes. Everything else in the middle is kind of negotiable. So there's 137 weather alerts. As you've probably heard, we have amber alerts now. We have silver alerts. We have blue alerts. Public safety alerts, we'll talk about those a little bit in a minute. And all kinds of testing that you may be familiar with. We'll talk about that in a second as well. And so as we're talking about EAS, we can talk about who issues these alerts, number one. How are they delivered, in this case, to radio stations, or how are they delivered to human beings, I guess you could say. How are they received? How does the human receive that alert? And what do they contain? So we go back to that slide. And the national alerts, you probably can't see it there, but it says the national alerts are issued by the president. By the way, that has never been used. There has never been a presidential alert. And we'll get to this in a second. I shouldn't get ahead of myself. So weather alerts are issued by the National Weather Service. And there are lots of really big weather companies in the country, right? Like the Weather Channel and AccuWeather and folks like that. None of them issue their own alerts. They don't want the liability for that. The only place weather alerts come from is the National Weather Service. The amber alerts might be your local police department or whatever, stuff like that. Public safety alerts might come from your county emergency management agency, something of that nature. So this is the one I was talking about. What alerts are required and which ones are not required? The national presidential alerts, you have no control over that. You must put that on the air. Like I said, it's never been used. But let's say the President of the United States, for whatever reason, says, "I need to address the nation right now." They will activate EAS, and it will break in on the air for whatever your programming is, and they'll say whatever they need to say. You have no control over that, and you must do that. you are also required to do tests. So whoever it is in your state, there's generally a state emergency broadcast or emergency agency or whatever. They set their own rules. There are some state rules, and it varies from state to state, which can be kind of confusing. But they send out a weekly test to make sure your device is working in your radio station. You don't have to put that one on the air. You just have to put it in the log, yes, we received it. And if the FCC should visit, they'll look for that. They'll look for those logs, and they want to see that you are paying attention and you're receiving the tests and you logged it as a successful test. The monthly tests, you put those on the air. A lot of stations do them at 2 o'clock in the morning or whatever, so it doesn't affect regular programming, I guess you could say. The optional stuff, you are not required at all to put weather alerts on the air. Why a station would not do that, I have no idea, but they are not required in any way to put weather alerts on the air. I think that's kind of unusual. Amber alerts are also optional. State and local alerts that may come from your police departments or emergency management folks, those are optional. Oops. So as I said, the weather alerts, and that's what I want to focus on. The other stuff is pretty self-explanatory. Who issues the weather alerts? National Weather Service does. I should put an asterisk next to that. They originate weather alerts. But there's another organization that you're probably familiar with called FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency. They have a service called IPAWS, I-P-A-W-S, Integrated Public Alert Warning System, I think it is. I don't know how I remember all this stuff. IPAWS, FEMA, takes the alert from the National Weather Service. They have a direct feed, and that's what is sent to your EAS device. So you're not getting alerts directly from the National Weather Service, so to speak. There's an intermediary there. And the IPAWS folks, and by the way, the guy who runs IPAWS for FEMA is a former radio engineer. They hired somebody who knew what he was doing. It was cool. State and local agencies can also send their own alerts. If you are set up on your EAS device, it can activate for those if you will allow that to go on the air, but that is optional. So how are they delivered? We know National Weather Service originates it. National Weather Service and FEMA send these things out. How do they get to wherever they're supposed to get? You may be aware that there are NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, radio stations all over the place, hundreds of them. They go there. I don't know if anyone listens to those stations. I suppose they do. If you have a weather radio at home that is activated, it probably is listening to a NOAA weather radio station. They've got tons of stations all over the place. Like I said, it's coming from FEMA and IPAWS. It goes to the radio and TV, and cable companies also have an EAS device. So you hear that on the air. I won't play you that audio because it's annoying. But you hear the and then you hear really bad audio. That is an alert. Those tones, that I won't tell you what they call them, that contains code. It tells you, when it's decoded, what is this alert, where is it for? That's how your device in your radio station knows whether to put that on the air or not, because it decodes that information, and then the really bad audio comes on. Personally, if you can understand it, I don't have a problem with the really bad audio. I think it's so bad it brings attention to itself, and that really is the objective of the alert in the first place, right? I know of I know a fellow who owns some stations in the Deep South, and he said, I will not put that on the air. I don't want that audio on my radio station because of what it sounds like. And my answer is, how often is this activated? Once every month? Once every 6 weeks? What's the big deal? He has some issues with that, though. Also, the alerts are delivered to private companies like mine. And there's one other place they are delivered. Oh, we have another slide here. Basically, that shows you what I just said. It goes to the NOAA weather radio stations, it goes to iPaws and is distributed to several places. It goes to private companies as well. And now let's talk about what comes on your cell phone. This is called wireless emergency alerts. The people in that business call it WEA. Have you anybody received those things on your phone at an inopportune moment? As in 4 a.m.? Your phone goes off and you're scrambling, how do I make this stop? I'm sitting in a library or sitting in a movie or something and my phone is going bananas. On your phone, in the setup, you can turn these off, at least most of them. So what is the advantage of the alerts if you can turn them off? As soon as somebody has that activate on their phone, most people say, how do I turn this off? I don't want this to ever happen again. So now we have a problem. We have a disaster or an emergency, and so many people have turned it off on their phones, which is another reason that radio is so valuable. In those places where those disasters were held, as I said, the cell towers went down. I either read or talked to somebody, I can't remember, during the wildfires that devastated Maui. Somebody was there on vacation about 2 miles from the disaster scene and was unaware that it was happening 2 miles away. The cell phone activation did not work. The cell towers were destroyed. And I remember either reading or they telling me, I forget which, we had to go out to the rental car and turn the radio on because power was out. We couldn't figure out what was going on. The internet's down, power's out. We had no idea that there was something 2 miles away that was causing such devastation. Radio, again, did its job. So wireless emergency alerts, there are lots of people in governments and in the various technologies and whatnot who say, we don't need radio anymore. All this stuff goes directly to cell phones. And that's exactly wrong. My opinion only. We are the last line of defense, really. What is radio? It's one to many, right? You can have one listener, you can have a million. Everything at your radio station is the same. We have to keep that, we have to protect that kind of thing, I guess is what I'm saying. So, we already did that. So if we talk about radio stations, how does the station receive it? These are the devices that you have, one of the two, more than likely. There are actually 1 or 2 other companies that make these, but they have like 0% market share. So these are the 2 main companies that produce this kind of hardware. One is called Digital Alert Systems. They call theirs a DASDEC. And the other one is Sage Alerting Systems. They call it an NDEC. Probably, if we went to most of your stations, you've probably got a Sage device because it's cheaper. Digital Alert, actually there's a guy who works for Digital Alert named Bill Robertson, which is my last name, and my father was named Bill Robertson, and his father was named Bruce Robertson, which is my name. So I called him once to ask him some questions, and he said, I never pick up the phone, but I saw caller ID with my father's name on it. And he picked it up and said, who is this? I said, no, it's not your father. It's somebody else with the same name. But I said to him, are you the big dog in radio? And he said, no, we're the big dog in television. and we're the big dog in cable. Sage has many more radio stations than DASDEC does, than Digital Alert does. However, you may be aware that Sage announced last year they did stop making their devices. If you have one already, they will service it, they will provide parts until they run out of it, and they will provide software updates, because the National Weather Service, the FCC, and so on frequently say, we're going to change things a little bit here, and the companies that make these have to update their software to take care of the changes. So Sage will continue to provide the software updates into the future. They said it was just too expensive, even though these devices cost at least a couple of $1,000s. It was too expensive for them to continue making them. And they decided to get out of the hardware business. So last but not least, well, this isn't quite last. The air chain. Again, how does this get on the air? So you have your studio, your radio studio on the left, producing your programming and whatnot, and all of that goes through the EAS box. And then the EAS box generally goes straight into your transmitter. That's how it breaks in on the air. You can still be in your studio playing your programming, playing music, doing whatever. It doesn't matter, because EAS seized your air signal, so to speak, and went on the air with the alert. And then it returns control back to your studio, and you're right back where you started. We are going to resume regularly scheduled programming, as they say. So it's usually between the studio and the transmitter is the way that these things work. Into the box, as we said, 3 primary ways of getting the information in there from iPause is the primary path, and I'll talk in a minute about the software that we have been working on for a long time to do alerts. And we had to decide, are we going to get alerts directly from the National Weather Service, or are we going to use iPause like you do in your radio station? And the iPause folks, who are very accommodating, by the way, try to get somebody at the National Weather Service on the phone. That's not going to happen. The iPause people are really good at this, and they're very helpful. They want people to use this properly and to work through any issues they may have. And I said to them, well, we're trying to decide, are we going to use your stuff from iPause? We're going to use it directly from the National Weather Service. They call it the National Weather Service Weather Wire. And the iPause guy said, just so you're aware, we don't take all of the alerts from the National Weather Service. We leave some things behind. He said, they have so much stuff in there that we don't think anybody cares about, that they're actually filtering what's coming out of the National Weather Service and passing along only the most serious stuff. Again, we don't want everybody's phone going off all the time, because that means people will turn it off. There's a thing that in that business they call alert fatigue. If you get too many alerts, you don't pay any attention to them anymore, right? And they're always being accused of you're putting out too many alerts, and people are tired of it, and they're turning it off on their phones, and so on and so forth. In contrast, for example, in Canada, they have a whole different system. It's similar, but it's different. And I was told by a guy I know who lives in the Yukon territories, he does software for emergency alerting in Canada. And he said it's not unusual that our radio stations have maybe 1, maybe 2 alerts per year. Whereas in this country, as you know, you might go through a period of storms that are going through, and it might be alerting just constantly and going off all the time. So we covered how it gets to the EAS box. And the EAS device, by the way, from those 2 companies, has multiple inputs. So it can take an iPause feed over the internet. A lot of stations have actually a radio that is tuned to NOAA Weather Radio, one of those radio stations, and it can activate the EAS box, so it's kind of a backup to the internet. What goes down in a bad storm? The internet. So there's a backup for that. And the other one that we can talk about is there are 77 radio stations in the United States, most of them AM, by the way, which plays into this big controversy that you may be aware of. AM in the dashboard of your car, the car makers want to leave AM out. A couple of them have. There's been legislation in Washington for 2 years now to force them to put AM or keep AM in the dashboard. My concern with that is that if the legislation passes, which it should have passed 2 years ago, I don't know what's taking so long, the car makers will retaliate, so to speak, by burying AM under menus in those big screens we all have on the, and if they are successful in doing that, then FM is next. So I don't know if the legislation says, no, it's got to be right front and center on that screen on the dashboard, or if they can. My wife has a 2023, I think, Toyota Venza. I'm usually a passenger in that car. It takes me a while to get to the radio through all of those menus and all of that stuff. It really is disturbing. So what we have are 77, they call them primary entry points, mostly, I think, and maybe exclusively, AM radio stations. They have built basically bunkers that they can receive emergency alerts from the government, like shipping container type things, and they put all this stuff in there. It's hardened against electromagnetic interference. If there should be a nuke somewhere in the area or whatever, perhaps it would survive. They've spent a lot of time and money, especially in recent years, hardening that system. So you've got 77 stations now. They pass those alerts on to other stations in their area. So in your area, you've got an LP1 station, which means one of the bigger stations. They are your contact for this stuff, and you're essentially rebroadcasting them. You're probably an LP2 station, something like that. When I worked in news in Youngstown, Ohio in 1985, we had a tornado that killed a bunch of people, and the alerts did not go out on our station or anybody else's, because the primary station in our area, which was not mine, botched it, basically. The folks in the station didn't have proper training in how do you pass this along to other radio stations, and it never got on the air anywhere. There was all kinds of upset about that, as you can imagine. So we have the PEP stations, primary entry points, then we have LP1 stations, and then we have LP2 stations. It's a daisy chain kind of thing. So there are multiple ways of this alert getting to the radio station and the EAS device. So your next question is, what alerts do I want on the air? And it's something that we're going to be facing a lot as we roll out this software I was talking about, that will be a supplement to EAS, not a replacement. Or we're going to, maybe we'll call it an enhancement to EAS, something like that. So I'll go to a radio station and say, 137 possibilities here. What do you want on the air? Like I said earlier, do you want air stagnation advisories on the air? I've never heard one on the air anywhere. Do you want a tornado watch? Of course you do. Do you want a tornado warning? Of course you do. Flood warnings? Absolutely. There are avalanche warnings in there. There are volcano warnings as part of the 137. Depends on where you are. We have a station using our stuff somewhere in Colorado, and he called me last year and said, you keep saying avalanche warning and it's freaking people out. And I said, well, the warning is in effect. What do you want me to do? He said, that's in the higher elevations. That's not us. I said, all right. So we changed the audio to say there's an avalanche warning for higher elevations, which sort of solved the problem. But you have to decide, number one, what counties. All of these things are done by county, by the way. All alerts are issued by county. So if you're an LPFM, you may just want one county's worth of alerts, right? If you're a 50,000 watt FM that covers 14 counties, you've got some decisions to make. Do you want alerts for 14 counties on the air? The program directors of most commercial stations get upset when all these alerts are on the air. It messes up their format. They complain loud and long about such things. So you have to decide which counties, and this is when you're programming that EAS device I was talking about. You've got control over all this stuff. And then you choose what alerts do you want on the air. And as ChatGPT put that thing at the bottom of that slide, the EAS system does not decide what airs, stations do. So, if I can get this to work, it might be fun to hear. I'm not going to play those tones that you hear on our radio stations, because we're all familiar with what those sound like. How about some other countries? I'll just play a couple of these for you, because almost all of them, with the exception of one, are kind of annoying. But they're meant to be annoying, right? Bring attention to itself. Yes, that's annoying. That's Mexico. Let's see what else we've got here. How about Canada? Yeah, that's annoying. That's enough of that. I'll play one more for you. Japan is almost pleasant. Would that make you jump out of your chair and run for the basement? I don't know. All right, is this going to come back now? There we go. So that's the audio. And for just a moment, before I wrap up, the future of EAS. The current FCC has said, we don't want to have to rely on those two devices that we saw on the screen a while ago. We want this to be software that you obtain and put it on any computer you want. That is going to open up the floodgates of a problem. So now you say, well, we've got an old Windows 10 computer sitting in the back room that we're not using for anything anymore. Let's put that software on there. So now you're depending on that to keep working. And there's got to be some hardware interface somehow with all of this. So even though the fear is, from the folks who make the EAS devices, the fear is the FCC is going to say, yes, we want this right now, and no one is ready to do that. And that's going to cause a whole lot of chaos. The SAGE people who have stopped making their hardware, they say they're ready to go with software only. But I think you're going to have some hard decisions to make at some point for your station. Do we do software only? And at some point this will be built into the automation software that you use. If you're using Simian or whoever, there are 100 different companies that make, literally 100 companies that make radio automation software. This will be built right into that at some point, and you won't have to worry about it. But you'll still have all of those choices to make. What counties do I want to serve? By the way, speaking of counties, I should have mentioned, there are a couple of counties in the United States that are so large that the National Weather Service did cut them up into pieces, which is what their plan was for all counties. But they've been talking about that for years and years. Clark County, Nevada, for example, Las Vegas, is 90 miles wide. So they cut that up into pieces. for this alerting stuff. Almost everybody else is stuck with the county level. So where I live, for example, is a big county in North Carolina, and my weather radio might go off for a severe thunderstorm warning that's on the other side of the county. It's 35 miles from me, and it doesn't really affect me. And what do I do after a while? I turn the radio off. I turn my weather radio off because I don't want to hear it anymore. There's nothing about any of this that's perfect, right? I don't know if it ever will be, but there are a lot of really good people who really try to find the problems in this and try and think of a way to fix it in the future. Last but not least, let's talk about one other thing. That's the name of what we're working on. Radio Alert will be a supplement to all of this stuff. And very quickly, the object of what it's about is a guy at a station in Alabama said to me a couple of years ago, he said, here's my problem. He said, let's say that there's a tornado warning. EAS activates, breaks in on the air, gives the warning on the air as it's supposed to. If the warning does not change from the National Weather Service, they issue it only once. And he said, I think of my listener who turned the radio on 10 minutes after that and he missed it. And he said, what we want from somebody like you is the same information in your audio repeated every 10 or 15 minutes until the alert expires. So that's what we've built. It's taken 2 years to get to the point we're at, and it will be released at some point when I'm comfortable. But I have a lot of my grandmother in me, and I worry. I've talked to quite a few stations who said, your hourly weather, we're not interested in that. But this thing is kind of interesting. So we may get more adoption of that than I think. Or maybe not. Who knows? So that's basically what we do and what the issues are and EAS and whatnot. I hope that was instructive. If anybody has any questions or if I got something wrong, I'd be happy to say, all right, where are we incorrect or whatever.
Because it's streaming in for everybody, could you just give like a basic what the cost would be to a station?
Sure.
For like a low power FM?
Yes. For small stations, Christian stations, community stations and whatnot, our weather is $50 a month. If they run it once an hour, that equates to about 7 cents per forecast. It's completely automated. So I always say to folks, if you use our system, you're going to have updated weather on the air at 3 in the morning. And the way our stuff works, I mentioned that I tend to geek out on this stuff, so I try to gloss over it when I'm talking about it because nobody wants to hear all the nuts and bolts of the stuff. But we recorded the 15,000 phrases I mentioned. They're all sitting in the cloud. And it's real human voices, by the way, at least at this point. I'm obsessive about audio, and AI is just getting to the point where I'm starting to say, yeah, that sounds pretty good. That's kind of impressive. So, and Radio Alert uses AI because there are millions of possible phrases in weather alerts. We couldn't possibly pre-record all that stuff. But for the regular hourly weather, when in an automated way we give you software, it goes to our cloud server and says, give me a weather file. At that moment, it grabs the data for your city, matches it to some of the 15,000 files, merges them all together, mixes music in the background, and sends it to your automation. That whole process takes about 4 seconds. And it's not unusual that someone in a station will say, well, we're going to download your file at 15 after the hour. We're going to put it on the air at 15 to the hour. I say, don't do that. Now it's 30 minutes old. Old weather is bad weather. Set the stuff up to download our stuff 5 minutes before the automation is going to put it on the air. Then it's as close to real time as you can get. There are, if somebody's watching the stream, unlike most of our competitors, there are no contracts, and the first month is always free. But that's the sales pitch.
Sample of that on your computer that
I do.
we could hear that?
If I can get it to play audio one more time. Let's see here. Get that out of the way. How about this one? This is a Christian station, I believe, either in Valdosta, Georgia, or Key West, Florida, one of the two. He's got 2 stations. Let's see if the audio still works here.
The weather for South Georgia and North Central Florida, currently 61 degrees, humidity 100%. The wind is from the southeast at 5 miles per hour. The forecast for this morning, mostly cloudy with a light breeze. The temp 62. This afternoon, some clouds here and there and somewhat breezy, 81 degrees. Then this evening, cloudy with some wind. We could see some drizzle, about 64 degrees. That's your weather from WAFT 101.1.
That's what it sounds like. And it's not unusual that I listen to this stuff and I say, I don't like the way I did that whole group of 500 files. We're going to do them again. It's a form of mental illness. And there is no medication for it. But I have to live with myself, and I already have trouble sleeping.
I received an alert on my phone of a tornado watch.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was like random. It just happened, because of the alert. So it wasn't on the hour. It was
Yep.
when it happened. Does your service provide an emergency alert like that?
That's what radio alert will be for.
And it'll break in?
It will not break in, because that is everybody's complaint about these things, that it breaks in. So EAS would be the first line of defense. That's what it's for. And our software is actually made, there's a control in there that we would say, how many times are we going to skip producing audio and send it to the station so EAS can go on the air first and do its job. Then we come in afterwards, and there's another control in there that says, how many times do you want this particular alert on the air? There's a gospel station in Helena, Arkansas, using our hourly weather. Overlooking Memphis, they also hit 50,000 watts. They hit Mississippi. And I hear from him now and then, he says, you've been saying flood warning for 4 days, and it's driving me crazy. I say, there's been a flood warning for 4 days. We're not in the business of overruling the National Weather Service. Radio alerts will have a control in there. Flood warning, how many times do you want it on the air? 20, 25, 30, and then it stops. But it is, you do EAS first, and then we come in after that with the same information until that alert expires.
So give an example again. I mean, we're in the South, so tornado. EAS goes off, tornado warning.
Yep.
Then what would you do if we said play it 4 times in an hour?
Then I would probably put it in there to skip the alert twice without producing any audio, and then it would produce audio 4 times and send it to your automation. And the way this works is, not to get too involved in it, but how does this get on the air? That's the question, because there's nobody there, right?
Right.
And it's not in your program schedule.
Yeah.
So what our system does is we use a system that the iHeart people call a dead file. Our system outputs a file, weather-alert.wave, with a half a second of silence in it. And the downloader we give you downloads it every 5 minutes. And you put ahead of time, before any of this happens, in the program schedule of your automation, play weather-alert.wave. Maybe every time you've got a break, top of the hour, for a commercial station, every stop set, every other song, something like that. It plays that half second of silence. Nobody hears it because it's so brief. But if there is an alert that fits your criteria, yes, we want this alert on the air, it produces audio, same file name, weather-alert.wave. The next time in that 5 minutes it gets downloaded, now the automation finds that, puts it on the air and plays it. then we replace it with the dead file again.
So most of us are running 26-minute shows.
Yep.
So 26-minute, then maybe music or a minute
Yes.
fill in. So
Yep.
I mean, I like that. I'm just saying that if we were having tornado issues, I would want it at the 15, but
Yep.
I can't because I already have that 26-minute that's playing.
Yes. I was told by so many stations, we don't want you breaking in on our stuff. We would have to have hardware that we would have to
Right.
provide to you and all
Just
of
like
that.
the EAS.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's what EAS is for.
So really, from our perspective, it would only be after or before the 26-minute program. So either at the top
Yep.
or at the bottom.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
For our weather system that we use now, I monetize it. So what I do is I have sponsors that will buy the weather forecast. Do you do that?
We do.
Okay.
The intros and the outros are all custom, and I encourage stations to make money with this stuff. And if you have 5 sponsors, for example, we would set you up in the system with 5 different files, and you download the one you need that hour. And we also have, I didn't bring it up. Let's see if I can find it real quick here. I have a little device. This is more for commercial stations. I don't know if you can see this little thing, and I can show it to you later. This is a temperature sensor. It connects to Wi-Fi, and it goes in the bushes outside the building of one of your underwriters, and it connects to their Wi-Fi, and it feeds the temperature to our servers every 30 minutes. So on the air, the weather could say, I live in Sanford, North Carolina. It's currently 82 degrees in Sanford. At Joe Smith Chevrolet, it's 84 degrees.
Oh, that's pretty good.
That's pretty cool. And so you go to Joe Smith and say, what's it worth to you to have your name embedded in the weather every hour? That kind of thing. It was clear to me a long time ago that we were not going to survive if we're an expense to stations. So we say if you have a potential sponsor or underwriter, we'll make you a file, an audio file with their name in it so they can hear what it sounds like. So you can hopefully sign them up and have a long-term relationship with them. Yes.
Okay.
So we
it's
have two different
prices?
things. We have the hourly weather, which has nothing to do with the emergency stuff.
It's $50.
Yep. Radio alert, honestly, I don't know how to price it because it might not be used at all for 6 weeks, and then it's used 100 times in 2 days.
Yeah.
And we have to pay the AI costs to produce the audio. I have no clue how to do it. I really don't.
Yeah, unless you are asking the station. I'm just trying to think. Mike might know that with automation to give you a log when it got played.
Well, we have a log in Radio Alert.
Yeah, there you go.
Because we're talking to, in fact, a Christian network, and they said, we don't want your hourly stuff. We don't want to do hourly weather, which I don't obviously agree with, but it's their gig. But he said, this Radio Alert thing, that is very exciting. He said, but we would have to get a sponsor, so we would need you to give us a log once a month of how often you send us audio so we can charge the sponsor that number of times.
So you could charge just when it
I
gets
guess.
played, yeah.
I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's a real problem for us to figure out.
Mike, you're done up there? Okay. Okay, well, any other questions?